I don't know how to talk after a lecture like that. That's the first time it's happened to me. I'm absolutely amazed, really amazed. I would like to share with you, although the hour is late, think ahead. That's the subject. So in the study on Alzheimer, I see there's a lot of thinking ahead. And some of the things we heard here, I don't see that. And that's what I'd like to share with you. We are at a very sensitive time. Unfortunately, the chief of staff told me that he is unable to come because we are in a state of emergency. The Iranians want to attack us, and the defense system is on alert, and he can't come. That can happen anytime. And in an hour's time, there will be a dramatic announcement by President Trump. It'll be surprising, and he will cancel the agreement. He will surprisingly cancel what we know he will cancel. And it'll be historical. And I'd like to give a few question marks, a few exclamation points, and I'll do it very briefly. Something personal now. I had the privilege to present to the Prime Minister in 1996. His name was Benjamin Netanyahu at the time, and he's the Prime Minister today too. The intelligence assessment regarding Iran that just continually developed. That's why this study so amazed me in pathological terms. And today we're at a crossroads. The Iranians are determined for Israel not to exist. I'm often asked, what do they want from us? What do they care if we're here or not? History repeats itself. Ideological, radical regimes that want to destroy the Jews mean what they say. I don't want to get into history, and this is one of those regimes. Iran was one of our greatest friends, and it's become one of our worst enemies. It's the only threat that has potential to be an existential threat. In populistic terms, a lot of threats are described as existential, but this is the only one that if there is a connection between radical ideology and nuclear arms, this is the only existential threat. And the Iranians right now are in a state where they identify an opportunity to move ahead dramatically. And they're moving ahead. And here's the description. 1, they built Hezbollah. That is an entity within Lebanon that is stronger than Lebanon itself, and it has 120, Bennett said 130,000 rockets aimed at Israel. That's 2,500 a day. I know it's scary what I'm saying, but it's the truth. And on top of that, they want to add missiles. The difference between a missile and a rocket is that a missile is a precision weapon. A rocket is not. And to that, they're adding Syria. President Assad, of whom the rumors of his demise were too early, wants to continue in power. He has 2 protectors, Russia and Iran, and the Irans are now collecting their debt. And their debt is to deploy on the Golan Heights and open up a new front based on Iranian forces, to which will be added Shiite forces from all over the world, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so on. Israel, if we don't stop it, will be surrounded with another front. I noticed something very interesting psychologically. When you talk about a process, it's like a person says, you have risk factors, and he says, don't leave me alone. I don't have any time to take drugs. But when he gets sick, he's surprised. When something happens, we're surprised. That's known. The U.S., which is a little bit depressing, is evacuating ISIS from Syria systematically, like a minefield, and is strategically helping Iran. And President Trump said, I don't want to be in Syria. There are 2,000 soldiers, U.S. soldiers, who are moving out the terror. And the caliphate is dying out. And the Iranians are playing a strategic game. And their next target is to build an empire from Iran to the Middle East. And it's happening because there's a vacuum. And there's a vacuum in Syria, and the Russians moved in. And the Iranians. And Assad has one advantage. He's the one who gives the licenses to the Iranians and the Russians. The U.S. have no legitimacy to be in Syria. And now we have to make decisions. Bad decisions are just as strong as good ones. The first thing I'd like to mention and discuss critically is the cancellation of the agreement. I think this is one of the worst agreements in the history of the world, but you need an alternative for everything. At the moment, to cancel the agreement without an alternative, what to do? Let's say in an hour, let's not even assume it's going to happen. Trump cancels the agreement. What will Iran do? I don't know. But I would guess, from what I know about them, they'll say, the U.S. has violated the agreement. We're continuing with the agreement. What does that mean? It means that the U.S. will be isolated. The U.S., our most important ally, Russia, China, two huge superpowers, Germany, France, UK, will be against the U.S. Now, the archive that was brought to Israel in that unbelievable operation is proof that Iran is determined to develop nuclear weapons, and it's proof that it is honoring the agreement. Now, if this agreement is canceled and Iran feels free to go back to its nuclear program while declaring with their typical treachery that they are keeping the agreement, the world will support Iran, the U.S. will be isolated, and they will have freedom of movement to develop nuclear arms. That will be very bad news, and I think that would be the wrong decision. I'm not giving grades to the U.S. president. The U.S. is very powerful, but I don't see an alternative. I don't see the U.S. attacking Iran if they develop nuclear weapons, and I don't think the sneaky Iranians will do it right away. They can wait 5 years. Iran is a civilization. Civilization has a history of thousands of years. They have time. 5 years in Persian history, especially, is like 4 seconds on my watch, less even. So that's the first thing. For Israel, we are encouraging the Americans. We're all satisfied. What are they satisfied? What's the option? We'll be on our own. The Iranians will go on the nuclear path, and the world will support them. That's how I see it. I'm giving you my opinion. I'll introduce myself. I was responsible for the intelligence assessment for 5 years, and I had the honor to be the first person to raise the Iranian threat in 1996. It's a long story, and then I had a few other jobs, but I'll save you having to listen to it. Israel is a small country. We had the head of Indian intelligence. I said to him, together with India are 1.3 billion people. The internal distribution is a state secret, but I will let you in on the secret. We are very small. We need to prioritize. The first priority is Iran. And that's why we need to make difficult decisions in other areas. The first thing is we need to develop ties with Arab countries, and we are doing that. But Arab country is mainly security ties, collaboration. But the Egyptian ambassador said some very harsh words. He represents Egypt, and it's a great honor that he came to the IDC. But what he said was, we will not accept the collapse of the peace process. We are benefiting today from a situation. You know, when you're benefiting from a better situation, nobody appreciates it. When I was the IDF spokesperson, and I always tell this story, there was a newspaper called Good News, and it fell apart after 3 weeks. Today, it would fall apart after 3 hours in the Twitter age. And now I'd like to remind you of something that a lot of people don't know. The security system is based on blood and money, but the diplomatic roots are weak. A tree that has one root in a political hurricane will collapse. Iran was one of our best friends, and now it's one of our worst enemies. Turkey was our sister, and now it's a sister from the past. Things change. In the Western world, changes can happen too. There are people who are familiar with it, and that's how it can happen. Now, if that's true, we need to develop our ties. Sadly, the Palestinian subject, and not everyone agrees with me. Some people, very influential, powerfully disagree with me. I worked with the Palestinians twice in my life. I was COGAT, the coordinator of activities in the territories, and I was a special envoy to the Palestinians. I was responsible for the Palestinian arena in intelligence and IDF intelligence, and I said that Arafat needs to retire because it was a mass murderer. And today we have Abu Mazen, who talks nonsense, and I hope he's not part of this Alzheimer, path-breaking Alzheimer study, but that's what it looks like. But I'm analyzing the facts. The fact is that we have outstanding security coordination with the Palestinians. You know how many lives that saved? Let me give you a few simple examples. Every couple weeks, Israelis who are famous for their self-discipline cross over to the Palestinian territories, and that could end in a massacre, and the Palestinian police brings them home. And the Tanzim, which is a very violent organization, they're quiet because Abu Mazen suppresses them. He doesn't do it because of a love of Zionism, because he's not a lover of Zionism. I understand he got his PhD from Primakov, who was the head of the KGB. In KGB, you get your degree based on your connection to the organization, nothing to do with your academic credentials. But in security terms, if Abu Mazen falls, he has no alternative. He's bitter, and he feels pushed into a corner. And Hamas, which is a pernicious organization, and its goal is to destroy Israel, supported by Iran, is becoming very attractive to the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. Nobody's talking about it. And I'll say to you, and pay attention to what the Egyptian ambassador said, if tomorrow Abu Mazen, I think he has wrong intelligence that he's going to be around forever. I don't think so, but he does. And if that's not true, he won't know it anymore. And what does that mean? Abu Mazen is not preparing any successors. And if we enter into a violent situation and a lack of proper successors, the good days will pass. And what I'm seeing in Gaza is a strategic step by Hamas. They're trying to make the violent option more attractive. They want to take over the PA. They want to take over Judea and Samaria because it is vital territory. You can disagree. But if that is the case, I don't see any Arab countries that will be tolerant for violence in the territories. Let me give you an example from Jordan. Jordan has today 9.5 million people. Of them, 1.5 million are Syrian refugees, 1.5 million from Iraq. But the majority are Palestinians. It doesn't matter if they're 60 or whatever percent. There are 10 refugee camps. There's Rabat Amon. It's a very sensitive area. It's like a volcano. If there is an eruption here, as one of the Arab leaders says, we have 5 seconds tolerance of violence in Jerusalem compared to other places. We have to respect ourselves and respect the other side. We don't appreciate the importance of this cooperation for our national security. I say to you that our eastern border is between Iraq and Jordan, not the Jordan River. And with Egypt, when so many people were killed here, today it's an outstanding cooperation, and the Gulf countries. But it's fragile. We need to foster and nurture it. It runs counter to the politics in Israel right now. And I'm very concerned about that because I consider this a strategic threat. If you want to fight Iran and in the territories and in Gaza, you can't. You know that the IDF, at least in the years until I retired, Enrico, did not cancel a single training exercise because of regular security in Judea and Samaria. That's an amazing achievement. And as a result of that, if these things change, and they're very fragile, I don't see Arab countries holding on vis-a-vis the Arab street. These are not democracies, but they're very sensitive to public opinion, what they call the Arab street. I am very concerned about that because these things are not seen and nobody talks about them, nobody writes about them in the papers, and we need to prioritize. So if the Palestinians, and I'm sure we'll have a peace agreement with them, but we need to give them some light at the end of the tunnel. We need some kind of policy here. That's why I call them think ahead. Regarding Syria and Iran, here the chief of staff, as I told you, he regretted very much that he was unable to be here, but I understand, of course. What's happening with Iran here? The decisions are different. Iran is determined to base itself in Syria as a second front, and Israel, based on its bitter experience in Lebanon, is determined to prevent it. If I'm determined to base myself and the other side is determined to prevent it, it's a collision course. The Iranian deterrence policy believes that they're allowed to hit us and we're not allowed to defend ourselves. That's what they say. It's very logical as far as they're concerned, but we, of course, don't accept it. And that's why, based on foreign reports, Israel attacked very effectively because we have an outstandingly excellent Air Force, even compared to previous years, and excellent intelligence as well. And apparently the results were very serious, and the Iranians are determined to avenge that attack. It's not emotional. Those are the rules of the game. In other words, Iran, will build a hostile infrastructure in the Golan Heights, and you will do nothing against us anymore. And so they want to respect us by using visual illustration, by sending a few missiles of a military nature in our direction. That's how I understand it. And Israel takes it very seriously, and that's why the chief of staff isn't here now. And we are preparing for that threat. Here, I think we have no choice. There are those who suspect political motivations or other things. I don't know anything about that, but we must not allow Assad to let them establish a foothold. Regarding Russia, we have a project that is being generously funded. It's also expressed here in the conference. I don't want to get into it. I don't want to get into the details of it. But the bottom line I want you to understand, Russia sympathizes Israel. I don't know if Putin has such strong feelings like sympathy, but he likes the Russian Jews here in Israel. He sees it as part of his cultural expanse. I heard him twice in my life, and I once was in his palace in Sochi. But Israel is not a strategic partner of Russia in the eyes of Russia. Iran is a strategic partner. There is no Russian sympathy or empathy for Iran. There's partnership. Unlike what people think, the Russians can't tell Iran what to do. They can send orders. They have a whole list of orders that will never be fulfilled. The Iranians work on their own. But there is a partnership. Why? First of all, there's no Shiite or Iranian terror or Hezbollah terror or any other terror in Russia. That's the most important thing to put in. Number two, the border is quiet. Three, there is economic cooperation. And for Russia, it's very important to come back to the Middle East as a superpower. Now, note the strategic game here. President Trump said, I want to get out of Syria. What do I need it for? He left 2,000 soldiers there who are cleaning the area of terror and leaving it open for other forces. In other words, there's a vacuum, a void. A vacuum is always filled. That's the rule. Who fills it? Russia and Iran. And we may end up on our own. I'm really concerned about it. I don't see a strategy here. I identify an American strategy not to be in Syria. Whereas the Russians, very wisely, I must say, Russia has a lot of weaknesses, economic and other, and that will be discussed at other forums, but it has leadership and strategy, and its strategy is to gain a foothold. Iran is a strategic partner of Russia. Turkey underwent a re-education policy in the School of Higher Diplomatic Education in Moscow, and Erdogan moved from being someone who topples Russian claims to such a partner that he acquired. He wants Russia to be the southern part of NATO, and how will that work? I don't know. The Russians supported the Kurds against the Turks for a while, and then the Turks against the Kurds for a while, as long as the Americans weren't in the picture. That's the strategic game here. The American answer, there is a vacuum, we're out of here. Okay, so we'll stay another 6 months and fight ISIS. That's the strategic situation. It's changing very much to our detriment, and I don't see an alternative. If you withdraw from the agreement, you need a military alternative. If you don't want to use a military alternative, you need a political or diplomatic alternative or a strategic alternative. And if you don't have anything, then the bad agreement is better than having no alternative. That it will enable the Iranians to stick to the agreement and violate it. The Iranians always remind me of Janus, the two-headed god, a two-faced god. And I once heard Rouhani give a lecture, and I found it so compelling that I almost became an Iranian citizen. He always said, I want peace. The Saudis are our friends. Let's embrace. There's no connection whatsoever between what they say and what they really think. And the other is their ugly, dark face of the Revolutionary Guards, who are in charge of the missiles and the whole approach of surrounding Israel. And they're working in Yemen against Saudi Arabia. They're the ones activating the Houthis to launch missiles to Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. That's an earthquake on a 9 on the Richter scale. And when they hear about the holy places, there are very deep ideological, religious dimensions. Who cares about Yemen? Nobody even knows where it is. It looks like it's a state that's already destroyed, but they're using it. There's a whole strategic game here, and we have to choose the less bad or less worst options. It says in our scripture that from the north will the evil come, but we have to use what we have. We have a very strong army, but the army can only be used against consensus targets, not against war of choice. We heard all these people say we need to occupy Lebanon, the whole world. I've seen that movie once or twice. I'm not against it in theory, but in war, blood is in ketchup. And when you occupy huge territories, you have to control them afterwards. I'd like to remind you, those who talk about retaking Gaza, okay, you've retaken Gaza, what then? You need to control it. 2 million people who have nothing. And in Lebanon, it's a huge area. Who will control it? I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I don't think we should be happy about it. I think, in parenthesis, I could give you a whole lecture on that. Wars in Israel need to be wars of no alternative. There are those who think otherwise. We've seen that in First Lebanon War. We haven't come out of that war yet. In Israel, I've reached the conclusion you can only emerge from a war of no choice with a consensus. Otherwise, you have internal criticism. People aren't willing to see fatalities unless there's no choice. There are a lot of things that we've learned over the years. This is the time to think strategically. This conference will also deal with, I just don't want to go on and on. One pillar of this conference is the classic strategic strategies, which I mentioned briefly. The other is our national resilience. I imagine our national home today being made of powerful concrete walls and steel. In other words, intelligence, Mossad, Air Force, etc. And on the other hand, I have a fear that the termites are tunneling under the house, and they could cause it to collapse. And we will discuss that subject at length with some excellent people. I won't expand on that because it will be discussed, and I trust Professor Reichman to present it better than me. There are important people here who will present it, and in any case, my time is running out, and I'm also competing with Trump, and that's not a good idea, and dinner. Ultimately, I would like to sum up and give you my message regarding the strategic picture. We live in an age when strategic thinking, professional, in-depth strategic thinking is the basis for a better future. It's like the weather today, or the weather we had 2 weeks ago. There was nice weather, blue skies, birds chirping, everybody happy. The weatherman says there are heavy clouds approaching. Nobody believes it, and when they come, you're surprised. Always surprised by the flood when it happens. Always surprised when the Ayalon highway is flooded, because statistically it's only supposed to happen 1 in 50 years. And those 50 years always happen in the first years and the last years. And in strategic assessments, unlike the weather, we have the ability to impact whether the clouds will even come. It is a combination of strategic wisdom, prioritization, and I point to Iran as a strategic target, but if we make unwise decisions, it may cost us dearly. And we are living right now, at this moment, we have the threat from the north, and we have President Trump, who's about to declare his policy regarding withdrawal from the agreement at 9 o'clock this evening. I thank you very much. I said that. I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry. You want me to repeat it? That's what I've been talking about for the last half hour. I said what to do. Let me tell you very briefly. Strong army. That's obvious. But we also need a lot of diplomatic wisdom and prioritization, but I went into that in detail and I won't repeat myself. Thank you very much.
אני מבקש להזמין את פרופסור